In today's video, we have some NHL breaking news to discuss, including an announcement regarding Phase 3 of the NHL return to play starting July the 10th. We also have a lot of other news and rumors to discuss, including some offseason stuff which come from Elliot Friedman's 31 Thoughts blog, as well as a few other sources, and we're mainly looking at the Leafs, Caps, and Devils. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we had some breaking news today regarding the NHL and its intent to move to Phase 3 of the return to play plan, which would be basically all their teams kind of getting together in their own cities, being able to have their own little mini training camps, which could last anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. So right now the date is July the 10th when that is likely going to happen, but of course that's not carved in stone. If anything could happen really with this virus and all the news around it and where everything is at from a health perspective and between the US and Canada, etc., that it could possibly end up changing. The NHL is trying to make sure that basically that all teams are kind of on a level, even playing field with what they have access to and all that. So right now we're in Phase 2 where the NHL players are able to go to their team's facilities and work out in small groups of 6 at a time. So obviously, that's going to determine, depending on how well Phase 2 goes between now and July 10th, assuming everything happens the way they're hoping it will determine kind of how long the NHL players and the association are going to bargain for time for training camp. I know we had heard 3 weeks before, but there is some talk that it could be shortened to 2 weeks if they feel that the players have gotten enough workouts in and had a successful enough Phase 2 that 2 weeks would be sufficient time. So if all that goes to plan, we're basically looking at somewhere around the 1st of August for the NHL play-in qualifying round to start, as well as the other tournament involving the top 4 seeds in each conference. At the end of Phase 3, they'd be going to the Hub Cities and playing a few exhibition games, getting ready to start the playoffs. Now, in regards to the Hub Cities, there was some reports from NHL sources indicating that Vegas is all but confirmed to be one of the 2 Hub Cities. Their sources indicate that basically the NHL's made lots of arrangements when it comes to hotels, restaurants, etc. There's a lot of things already in place, and it's just not officially announced as of yet. So obviously that could be huge. Obviously Vegas was pushing hard to be one of those hub cities, and it's looking at this point, based on this report at least, that they very well might be one of the 2 cities involved. Now, we also had some other news regarding the situation from Ryan Rishaug of TSN, indicating that there seems to be progress being made, and a report could be coming out here soon in the next few days regarding the Canadian government making exceptions for NHL players coming into the country to not have to do the 14-day quarantine, which is currently required. If you enter Canada from another country, you do have to go into isolation for 14 days. Obviously, all the NHL teams, especially the ones that have been lobbying to be hub cities like Edmonton and Vancouver and Toronto to an extent, are looking to get an exception made, because if this cannot be had, it'd be impossible to be a hub city, and it could even prove difficult just for the NHL Canadian teams to have their Phase 3 training camps at their normal facilities. I mean, there is talk that most of these teams were looking at backup plans to hold training camps at different locations in the United States if that was going to be easier. If July 10th ends up being the date and players had to isolate first for 2 weeks before being able to go and participate, they'd have to be back in their Canadian cities by June 26th. I mean, which right now gives them enough time to make arrangements, but without there being a firm date, it's kind of difficult. But there seems to be progress right now that might not be a requirement, and I think if that's the case, we probably will see one of those Canadian cities be a hub. I know there's been a lot of talk about some of these cities, especially Edmonton probably being the most vocal, trying to push hard to be a host hub city. And I know the NHL seems to be really wanting to put one of the hub cities in Canada too. So hopefully that'll all work out. And even though we may not have a firm announcement here in a few days regarding who the hub cities are going to be, we could have an announcement from the Canadian government giving them the exception that they're looking for so that they can possibly make that happen. So either way, that's some big news from the NHL. Another step in the right direction here. Clearly, it'd be exciting to get hockey back. Right now, we're looking at June 26th for the draft lottery, and then if we have Phase 3 on July the 10th with a 2 to 3 week training camp, at least we'd have something more to look forward to. Now, in regards to the return to play, there was a lot of information in Elliot Friedman's latest 31 Thoughts blog that came out today, indicating a lot of NHL players, mostly younger prospect players, who could be involved with NHL teams during this return to play. One thing that's still a key detail, though, that is being worked on between the PA and the league is whether or not teams who were able to sign players and have those contracts kick in for 1920 like many of them hoped for. I mean, a key example would be a guy like Ilya Sorokin, who's waiting to sign with the Islanders. You get Romanov in Montreal, and numerous others as well. And it's an important piece for them to want to be able to play during the 1920 season. And there's lots of other prospects who already have their contracts and could become part of these NHL rosters due to the fact that they're going to be allowed to be larger than usual. Now, I'll give you a little snippet here from Elliot Friedman's blog talking about a lot of the players that he believes would be involved with the expanded rosters. This includes several young players, as I mentioned. Dallas Stars especially has a number of them here, including Jason Robertson, goalie Jake Ottinger, Thomas Harley, and Ty Dellandrea. The Predators listed Eeli Tolvanen as likely being involved. The Vancouver Canucks had Sven Baertschi as being one of those players. Now, I know he's not a young prospect, but somebody who's been up and down to the NHL, currently was not on their NHL roster. The Coyotes appear to be wanting to bring in Victor Soderstrom. The Wild were going to bring up goalie Kaapo Kähkönen as well as a few others. The Hawks would like to bring in Ian Mitchell, but again, that's one of those other contracts that would have to be approved because he was a later signing. The Philadelphia Flyers included Morgan Frost. You get the Columbus Blue Jackets, Liam Foudy, Nick Robertson of the Maple Leafs, which we've heard of before, who is also a possibility to play from what we've heard rumblings around the Maple Leafs. The Panthers were another team who could have some interesting guys like Owen Tippett, and Denisenko is another player who signed late and would like to be able to play or at least be involved in these activities if they're allowed to be, but another guy who would need to be approved here with the ruling. And then with the Rangers, he mentioned Vitaly Kravtsov, which isn't a huge shocker, but Elias Anderson as well. The Rangers appear to be trying hard to kind of mend fences there. He did play well over in Sweden once he got back to playing after he went over there, after he left the Rangers earlier this year. And they are trying to keep open lines of communication and see what they can do there. So I would say it's not a foregone conclusion that they trade him. You never know. They might be able to mend things up, get things back on track, and see if he can become a part of their future. So I guess we'll see. But there's all kinds of great, interesting prospects who might be able to take part, at the very least, in the workouts and be like the Black Aces for a lot of these teams. But some of these players might actually get a chance to play as well, and could be an exciting time for them this summer. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have some NHL offseason rumors I want to take a look at. There was a recent article from NBC Sports talking about the Washington Capitals and Braden Holtby and what his future may hold. Of course, as we know, the Capitals are in a tight cap situation, as many teams are, especially teams that have been very successful in the last number of years. Obviously, Holtby's coming to the end of a contract which paid him over $6 million per year, and right now they have young goaltender Ilya Samsonov, who is more than ready, appears to be, to take over the reins and be the starting goalie for the foreseeable future. And obviously, being on an entry-level deal really solves their situation for the cap crunch, at least for the short term. There was some talk in the article wondering, would Holtby consider a one-year contract at a smaller amount of money to be able to return to Washington? And they didn't really feel that was a likely possibility. A player of his age, and given where he's at in his career, he's likely going to want some term. This might be one of the last big-time contracts he could possibly sign. He's already over the age of 30, so depending on how long he plays for, if he gets a decent amount of term now, it may not be his last contract, but it could be his last longer-term deal, and it makes a lot of sense, and I agree with the author of this article here, that Holtby's time in Washington is likely will be coming to an end. I've mentioned this before, really ever since the NHL trade deadline. I didn't see Holtby being a guy that the Caps would have traded leading into the NHL playoffs, but at the same time, I don't see him returning next year either. I don't see it's a situation where they're going to be able to afford him, and they have the goaltender of the future ready to take over, so it only makes sense in that regard. Obviously, Braden Holtby is going to be one of the bigger-time goaltenders on the free agent market when we hit the offseason, which is likely looking to be sometime early fall before the 2020-2021 NHL season starts. There's definitely going to be a few teams out there looking for goaltenders as well. So he'll certainly have plenty of opportunities, I think, to get the term and money he's likely looking for, but he may not necessarily be able to get that from a top contending team. I know he's been used to playing on a Capitals team that's been very successful for a long time, but I do think his time is up, and he may very well, if he wants term and he wants the kind of money that you would think he would be commanding, he's likely going to have to go elsewhere. It's hard to say where he'll end up next year, but I'd be surprised if he's still with Washington. Now, as I mentioned as well, there's some rumblings around the New Jersey Devils, and one of the items from Elliot Friedman's blog was a possibility of Eddie Olcyzk possibly being involved to be the next GM to help run the franchise. Obviously, there's been some talk about coaching candidates. We've heard talk about different GM candidates. As I mentioned in the last couple of days here, there's been some talk that things might be kind of at a standstill, might be on hold. They've done a lot of interviews in various aspects, but interim GM Tom Fitzgerald appears to be having things under control, so it's not really quite clear there. But as Friedman mentions today, apparently Olcyzk is somebody who was in the running to possibly be leading the Devils now. Of course, it wouldn't be shocking to find out if he would possibly could be linked to the Blackhawks too. Obviously, we know he's from Chicago. He played there a long time. Has a lot of history with the franchise. They recently let go of their team president and are looking for somebody on a full-time basis to take over that role. So there was some talk before too. Really been quite a talk for a long time that he might be looking to leave the broadcast booth and to get working back for an NHL team at a high level like that, potentially as a team president or in some kind of executive role. But everything else I've heard recently about the Devils indicate that it looks as though Fitzgerald very well could be running the team for a little while, and there might not be a big rush for them to take that interim tag off of him or to go in a different direction. So I'm not sure. It wouldn't be surprising to see Eddie Olcyzk get back involved in some capacity with one of these teams, but not sure anything like that right now would be imminent, at least for the short term. There was also an interview from Tom Fitzgerald asking about what he sees the Devils' biggest need being as we have the Devils now officially in their offseason, which is going to be an extended offseason for them since they're not in a 24-team playoff format. And his answer was quite simple, that they need to improve their blue line. They need some more size back there and somebody who can also move the puck so they can become a tougher team to play against. And obviously they have some up-and-coming young offensive players in the forward group. They can do a better job of getting the puck to those offensive players to let them do their thing, and then at the same time be better on their own end and have that size and be tough to play against. They would be a much better hockey team, which certainly I agree with as well. That blue line does need some work. And as I mentioned before, it wouldn't be shocking if improving that blue line led to a PK Subban trade. There isn't any new or fresh talks or rumblings around PK being moved, but considering where they're at with the team, I don't see it making sense that they carry a $9 million defenseman. There's not a lot of time left on his contract. They could retain some salary and move him out to get something in return who could help them more for the future. I would think it probably might be in PK's interest to move on as well. Things didn't really work out for him in New Jersey last year, but it wouldn't be surprising if Tom Fitzgerald is still in charge when the offseason is a little bit more kicked into high gear, that they try to really work hard to get some other defensemen here to help this team. But he mentioned as well, it doesn't have to be anybody flashy, to somebody with some size who can move the puck and get the job done. Now, speaking of defense, obviously we know that's also an area of focus for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I came across an article talking about the fact that maybe instead of addressing their blue line via trade, maybe Kyle Dubas could actually help do this through free agency after all. Now, we talked about the fact before that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to have some tough decisions to make when it comes to helping their blue line, because they're not going to have a lot of salary cap space to really work with, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't make other moves. They could sign a player in free agency and then make another trade to make the cash work and money in, money out type of deal. If they do it this way, it might give them some more flexibility. And the player that they could possibly look at would be TJ Brodie of the Calgary Flames. Now, as we know, last offseason, the Toronto Maple Leafs tried to acquire him. There was a trade all lined up between the Leafs and the Flames, which would have sent Nazem Kadri to the Flames for TJ Brodie, but Kadri nixed the deal with his no-trade clause. Of course, he was later traded to Colorado. He really kind of seen that the writing was on the wall here. He was being moved one way or another by Toronto, so that deal was accepted, and he went off to the Avalanche in exchange for Tyson Barrie, and of course there were some other pieces there as well. But obviously, Brodie was a player that the Maple Leafs really valued in that deal. He's looked upon as being one of the better defensive defensemen around the NHL. He's also looked upon as being a guy who can play a lot of minutes. He's played a lot with Mark Giordano over the years as well, and really could be a steady force back there with the Maple Leafs. And like I said, he's viewed upon as being a strong defensive player who can be tough to play against, and obviously Toronto could certainly use that now. Now, TJ Brodie is a left shot, but he plays the right side mostly, so clearly he could be a good fit there. He's from Ontario as well, so it might be of interest to him to head back to his home province. There's been a lot of talk that between Brodie and Travis Hamonic that the Flames would not sign both of them to return to Calgary, and then Brody likely is a guy who is likely leaving town. It's been in talk for quite some time. Obviously, they tried to trade him before. I think it's been rumored that he wouldn't be being re-signed. So it would make a lot of sense that the Toronto Maple Leafs might be able to make this work. But obviously, it boils down to the price tag. What's it going to cost to sign him? How much term is he going to want? What kind of money? Hard to say at this point. Obviously, he's getting into that stage of his career where he's not as young as he used to be. He's obviously going to be over the age of 30, so you wouldn't want to commit too much time and too much money to him. But if you can get him on the right price on a short-term deal, to me that makes a lot of sense that he would be a great addition to the Leafs blue line. Looking at if they were able to do that, along with some of the other moves we've already seen, like the Mikko Lehtinen signing, maybe this blue line could be much improved for next year. Hard to say, but it is an option. They can still trade it forward, but at least they wouldn't be looking for that, one-for-one type of swap. That for that ideal scenario, they could move a player like a Kasper Kapanen or a Janssen and Kerfoot or any of those guys that have been talked about to a variety of teams, but they wouldn't necessarily have to take back that right shot defenseman that they're looking for. If they had other options for either future assets like a top prospect or draft picks or something to that effect, that could be used as well for future currency, but it wouldn't necessarily have to line up that perfect trade, so it might give them some more flexibility. I said we know that Brody was a player that Dubas certainly was very interested in before, and it could happen again through free agency since his contract's expiring here in short order. So let me know your thoughts on that as well as everything else discussed here today, and we can continue the conversation down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.